From the studios of A Christian Viewpoint, going out into all the world and preaching the gospel to all nations, here is your host, Minister Michael Patrick Mitchell.
Good morning and welcome back to the show. Today we are going to talk about something that I have titled Naamanism. Naamanism. Now, I'll put that word that I'm using there on the screen and I'll explain it for you in just a moment. But we are going to talk about a faith that doesn't include obedience, a faith that refuses obedience. And we're going to be today in our Bibles in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 5. So if you'll turn there with me and just keep her there, and we're going to look at some different verses there. And we're going to look at a man by the name of Naaman. Now, Naaman is not an Israelite. Actually, he was an enemy of the Israelites. He hated the Israelites. He was a commander of the Syrian army, and he was a man of great power and position and pride. And he was a mighty warrior, according to the Bible. He was respected and wealthy. Yet, underneath all of that was a hidden shame. Naaman had the deadly biblical disease known as leprosy. Now, if you know anything about leprosy, it was a disease that was just horrible, and it really caused a person to visibly become what in that society was termed as unclean. The person would be covered in sores and boils all over their body. And one thing about leprosy that would happen is blood would stop flowing to certain extremities within the body. And as a result, those extremities would become purple and they would eventually die from lack of blood. And eventually those extremities could or would fall off. And so you would have these people who were very sickly, covered in sores and boils with missing ears or the tips of their nose or missing fingers or even arms. These people can walk down the street and rub their ear, and their ear just rubbed completely off. And so it was a horrible, horrible disease. And Naaman, this man Naaman, had this disease. And so, of course, desperate to be healed, to somehow get rid of this disease, which there was no cure for in those days, Naaman heard of the prophet Elisha, the prophet of the God Yahweh, who was doing miraculous things and had the ability through his God actually had the ability to heal people and can heal this sickness of leprosy. So Naaman decides to go against everything he believes and go to this prophet of Yahweh, of Israel, these people he hated, to seek a healing. And so in 2 Kings chapter 5, he travels to visit Elisha, and he comes to the home where Elisha is, and he asks Elisha to come out and see him, and Elisha refuses. But instead, he sends a messenger out. He says, "Go out and tell Naaman this." And he says in verse 10 here of 2 Kings chapter 5, he says these words. He says, "Go out and tell Naaman to wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be made clean." Now, let's stop for a second here because there's something I want you to see. Notice the word wash here. Go out and wash in the Jordan. That's the Jordan River 7 times. Now, the Hebrew word that is used here for wash literally means to bathe, immerse, or dip. Okay, so this word, this Old Testament Hebrew word is equivalent to the New Testament Greek word baptizo, which also means to bathe, immerse, or dip. And so the two words there, Old Testament, New Testament, Hebrew, Greek, mean the same thing, to immerse oneself in water. So, uh, Naaman then was commanded basically to baptize himself. That's the word that we translate there, baptize in the Greek, baptizo. We translate it into, transliterate it into a word, baptize. So he was commanded to go and baptize himself in the water in order to be healed of this disease that he had. So easy enough, right? I mean, just go down into the water, baptize yourself 7 times, he tells them. And when you come up on the 7th time, you shall be made clean. So pretty easy instructions there. Well, I guess not for Naaman, because as we read on here, we see that Naaman got angry. And look what he says in the next verse here in verse 11. After the messenger says this, he says, "Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure my leprosy." So I don't know. I've studied through this before, and I've used this Bible verse as a great shadow of what was to come, which is a New Testament baptism. And I've pointed some things out in this story. And as I was writing this lesson one day, something jumped out at me. And I don't know if you see what I see, but Naaman was told what he was to do by God through God's messenger, what he was to do. And Naaman didn't want to do that. He thought that that was unnecessary. And so Naaman wanted what some today are calling a faith-only salvation, an Old Testament version of the sinner's prayer, if you will. He wanted Elisha. He said, "Surely I thought he would just come out and stand here and just kind of like wave his hand over me and I would be saved." And that's basically what the sinner's prayer is today. Someone comes up to you and they says, "Hey, would you like to be saved and from your would you like to be healed from your sin and saved from your sin?" And the person says yes, and that person usually waves their hand over them or places it on their shoulder and says a few words, and then boom, that person is healed. No action that they have to take, no obedience that the person has to do, just some words and they're healed. And that's basically what a lot of people are doing today. The Bible says there is one way that we are to be saved, that there are certain things that we need to do, just as Naaman had to do. And a lot of people say, "I just feel like that's unnecessary. Let's just say a few words and I'll be saved right here on the spot." And so that's where I've come up with the word Naamanism. I said, wow, these people are committing Naamanism. They're doing the exact thing that Naaman did. And basically, what they're doing is they're trying to create a religion and follow a religion of faith that is without obedience. And of course, the book of James deals with that extensively. But yeah, he had belief in God's power. Naaman had belief in God's power. He believed that he traveled all the way to Elisha. And he says, I feel like he can just come on out and he has the ability and power, his God, to heal me. But he refused God's method. He refused it, which is disobedience, you see. And what really is taking place here is that he didn't really have faith. He had belief, but he didn't have faith. Now, what's the difference? Well, faith is acting out on what you believe. You believe in God, then do what he says. That's faith. But he said, no, belief is enough. I just want to believe. And that's what a lot of people are saying today, especially with the sinner's prayer. All you have to do is believe. And essentially what they're saying is you don't have to have faith. Now, they'll accuse us and they'll say, you don't have faith. But the truth is that they don't have faith. You see, I have faith. I'll do exactly what he says, regardless to what I believe, regardless to what theologians teach, regardless to what I think is necessary or unnecessary. For his ways are higher than my ways, and his thoughts are higher than my thoughts. And if God says to jump, I'm going to say how high. And I'm not going to say, well, jumping is not something that is necessary. God can do it without you jumping. I'm not going to question God. I'm going to do what God says to do. But Naaman and those who practice Naamanism, they disobey God. And yes, they believe, but they have no faith. So as we continue to read here, Naaman's leprosy remained. He wasn't healed. And so his servant turns to him and he says these words to him. Naaman's servant. In verse 13, his servants come to him, and he spoke to him, and he said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have just done it? So how much rather then, when he says to just do something simple like wash and be clean, why don't you just do it? So, had he said conquer nations or give him a part of your nation or something amazing that would be noble of you, you would have done it. But since he says to do something so simple that in your mind you can't understand the necessity of it, why not just do that simple thing? And folks, it's the same thing today. I mean, baptism is so simple, honestly. Now, the decision behind baptism is not simple, and it is costly. And what is taking place in baptism, if understood correctly, is not simple. It is very costly and the biggest decision a person will ever make in their life. But getting in water and going under and coming back up is incredibly simple, at least for most people. So he says these words to him, and then in verse 14, excuse me, Naaman, he agrees. And so it says he went down and my translation here, the KJV says dipped him. Okay, so there's that word, that Hebrew word dipped, immersed, bathed. He immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And watch this, his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And so he obeyed. He understood, he finally agreed, and he obeyed, and as a result, he was washed clean. Now, let's make sure we understand something here. We are not saying, those of us who say that a person must be baptized to be saved, and that is what God is asking us to do, the same thing that he asked Naaman to do here, and it is an act of obedience and faith in what God says. We are not claiming that the water itself has any healing properties, that it in of itself has an inherent healing power. It is the obedient faith that heals, okay? And it was Naaman's faith. It wasn't the water. It wasn't the Jordan River's water. It was his faith in doing what God told him to do that healed him. Jesus, when he was on earth, we see that a few times when somebody came to him asking for healing, and just because they believed and came to him and believed that he had the words and the ability, he said, your faith has healed you. That action, that you believed in me so much that you came to me to ask what you need to do, that's the faith right there that's going to heal you. Now, remember this. In Romans chapter 15, verse 4, it tells us that all of the things that are written in the Old Testament were a shadow of what was to come. It says they were written for our learning. They were there as examples to teach us of what is to come and what not to do and what to do in these situations. And so Naaman's baptism here in the Jordan is a shadow of the baptism that is coming in the New Testament. And we can look back and we can say, now, when you are faced with God's command to be baptized in the water, do not do as Naaman did and disobey, but instead obey, and you shall be clean. And today, many people in the spirit of Naamanism are denying baptism as essential for being cleansed. And like Naaman, they want to say what they are calling a sinner's prayer, which is nowhere to be found in the Bible. There's no example of anybody being converted to Christ in that way, where they just said a few words and that was it. People do take verses like Romans 10, 9 and 10 out of context and apply it wrongly hermeneutically. But no, nowhere do we have that example where some words are spoken, a hand is laid on somebody's head or waved above them, and or they hold hands and they say a prayer together, and they are saved. We do not see that method anywhere. And we do not see that pattern anywhere. And my predecessor, John Butler Book, would often uh, say, I think he used to say, I'll give anybody $1,000 if they could show me that in the Bible. And I used to say, you might as well raise that to 1 million, John, because they can't show you. And so in the story of Naaman, we are actually learning the opposite, that this method of saying some words and waving a hand uh, is not God's method, that this is not what God desires. So, with that said, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to show you some similarities between these two baptisms. We've looked at some so far, but I'd like to really pinpoint some similarities, but I'd also like to pinpoint some of the differences too, because there are some differences in the baptism. So, Naaman's baptism and Christian baptism, one similarity is that they were both for the cleansing of a disease. Now, Naaman's disease was physical, our disease is spiritual. And that's the big difference between the Old Testament stories, the examples, the shadows of what is to come. They were physical, these are spiritual now. And so his was physical, ours is spiritual. Both of us, though, have a disease that is destroying us, that is eating away at us on the inside, and is ultimately going to kill us and separate us from God for all eternity. And so there's those similarities there in Naaman and us. Naaman's baptism and Christian baptism both involve the immersion of our bodies in water, that is to fully and put ourselves in water. Hebrew word rakaks, rakats, trouble sometimes pronouncing Hebrew. And then in Greek, baptizo, you got those two words, both mean immersion. Okay. So, it's very important that we learn something from the scriptures. And when we look to these Old Testament stories, which are our examples, one of the things that we learn is that we must follow God's pattern exactly. You see, Naaman needed to follow God's pattern for cleansing. Otherwise, he would not be cleansed. And we have story after story after story that teach us this. We have the story of Noah's ark. Noah built an ark, it says, according to the pattern of God. We have the story of Moses building the tabernacle. He built the tabernacle according to the pattern of God. We have Solomon building the temple. He built it exactly according to the pattern of God. None of these men strayed an inch to the right or an inch to the left. They built exactly according to the pattern of God. They didn't substitute any of the material. They didn't reason within themselves or try to justify substituting material or doing anything different. They did it exactly as God said. And these are all examples for us that we must spiritually build our lives. We must build and follow our lives exactly according to the pattern of the words that we find in the New Testament. We must do exactly what God says, regardless to what we think is necessary or unnecessary, or whatever we think is good or not good, or whatever we think is uh, needed or unneeded. We must follow those words. I mean, can you imagine Noah saying, I don't think that we need that many windows? I know, God, you said to make X amount of windows and to put them here, but I think that, two is sufficient. So I'm going to just do two. Could you imagine that? What would have happened? I'll tell you what would have happened. The ark would have never, it would have never got off the ground. It would have sunk. And my friends, if we build our life and we decide to try to substitute or stray from the pattern of God, we're going to sink. We're going to sink. Yeah. So do exactly what God says. I mean, that's just common sense, isn't it? That's the way it is with everything. Um, I mean, which of us here would if we were to build a table, we go to the store, we buy a table, and it comes with instructions. Which of us here would stray from those instructions and maybe skip steps 2 and 3 and go straight on to step 4? I mean, that's just common sense. If you do that, what's gonna happen? Well, the table's not gonna be built. It's not going to, at the very least, it's not going to last. It's not going to stand up over time. So we must build exactly according to the pattern, or else we will never reach our destination. It's the same thing with directions. If I gave you directions to my house from your house, and it had 10 steps, but you decided to skip step 3. What's going to happen? Which told you to make a right on such and such road. What's going to happen if you blow past that road? You're never going to reach your destination. My friends, don't blow past baptism. Don't blow past what God has said and the examples that we have because you think you know a faster way or a shortcut, or you think that, that road is unnecessary. So, a lot of people do that. They say, you don't need to follow the instructions at all. All you need to do is believe that Mike does know the way to his house, and that's going to get you there. Don't worry about steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Throw that away. That's unnecessary. Just believe. I've heard people use the illustration. You believe that this life preserver can save you. You're out there in the middle of the ocean, you're floating, your ship has sunk, you're about to die, but then someone pulls up, and out of the grace of their heart, they decide to throw you a life preserver. They didn't have to do that, but out of grace, they decided to do it. As a matter of fact, maybe you don't even deserve to be saved, but he's going to do it anyway. Maybe this is somebody that you have offended, that you have sinned against, that you have hurted in the past, but they pull up and they see you there, and out of the love and out of the grace of their heart, they decide to throw you a life preserver and pull you in. Now, that's exactly what Jesus did for us. He's thrown us a life preserver out of the grace of his heart. Nothing we did has caused him to make that decision. As a matter of fact, he should have made the opposite decision. That is what we deserved, for him to make the opposite decision, to leave us there. But out of the grace of his heart, and grace is getting what you don't deserve, he has decided to throw us a life preserver and make a way for us to be saved. But we must grab that life preserver. You can't just say, well, I believe that life preserver over there that he threw to me will save me, so therefore I'm saved. No, if you don't grab it, you'll never be saved. That's just common sense. And my friends, that's what God is doing. He says, now here, I have provided a way, but you must grab it through obedient faith. You must grab it through faith. And if there is no faith, then it is impossible to please God. And then in Hebrews 11, he goes through all these examples for us of those who acted out on what God said, and it was accounted righteousness to them because of their faith. That is what faith is. James said, you say you have faith? Well, show me your faith. Show me your faith, and I'll show you my faith by what I do.
Thank you for watching A Christian Viewpoint. Your prayers and support help us continue sharing truth across the nation. Send your support to the address on the screen or visit us online at achristianviewpoint.com. Subscribe to our annual magazine and stay informed.
Across parts of Nigeria today, many believers live under constant pressure. Families face poverty, instability, and, in some regions, open hostility toward their faith. Children are often the most vulnerable, growing up without safety, without opportunity, and without access to quality education. For orphans and underprivileged children, the future can feel hopeless before it even begins. Yet in the midst of these challenges, God is still at work. Great Hidden Treasures, Christian Schools, is seeking partners who share a vision for reaching the next generation through education and faith. Support is needed in the form of financial assistance, educational materials, and volunteer involvement. Every contribution helps place a child in a classroom, put books in their hands, and plant the Word of God in their hearts. For many of these children, this school is their only opportunity to escape the cycle of poverty. It is a place where orphans are known by name, where underprivileged children are treated with dignity, and where the love of Christ is not only taught but lived out every day. But the need is great, and this work cannot continue alone. To learn more about Great Hidden Treasures, Christian Schools, and how you can partner in this work, please visit our website on the screen. Together, we can make an eternal impact, one family, one community at a time.